now have with us here at our table, aside from Maria, who is now turned anchor to analyst, we now have Jayeel Cordero, who is a sociologist and a very keen observer of what has been happening in the last 24 hours. What have you observed, Jayeel, in the last 24 hours?
In many ways, Cheche, this is no longer surprising to me. As I was mentioning to you
Yes.
upon joining you here, Nicole and I were in Tacloban last Friday to monitor the trends there, so to speak. And we were invited, thankfully, to the sortie that Bongbong Marcos and the Romualdez has organized for their followers. This was at the Tacloban Astrodome. Interestingly, of course, we were already expecting what kind of rhetoric he would articulate there for his followers. Of course, there was what sociologists would consider collective effervescence, that electricity that one feels when everyone gathers together, in a some sort of ritual. In fact, they were singing a lot of songs about the nation, from Ako ay Pilipino to and the like.
Okay.
Now, when Bongbong Marcos gave his speech there, I suppose it was not the first time that he said it, but it was certainly the first time for me to hear him say that in person. He said that if we lose this elections, most likely we have been cheated. And I felt that at that point in time, he was, well, there are two ways to approach that. One is he was conditioning already his followers that in the event that they lose, then they have something to say to the public, right? Face saving, so to speak. But on the other hand, it could also be the emotions or the sentiments that his own followers have from the ground up, so to speak, about the impending. Well, there's that fear amongst our informants. Potential cheating. Yes. In fact, Cheche, as we were going around, different communities there, we were interviewing people for our research. This is the Vote of the Poor 2016, funded by the Ateneo. So many times, people were telling us that they're afraid that there could be cheating. Of course, some of them are supportive of other candidates as well.
Yes. That's very interesting because I read somewhere that Sigmund Freud,
Yes.
The analyst and the psychologist, said that there are some types of leaders who prey on the fears of certain groups. Does this fit into what you observe?
You can say that, but maybe I won't do a Sigmund Freudian analysis here. I think it has to do also with how do I put it? Maybe yes, at one level it's very Freudian, preying on the fears that people have.
It's the power of suggestion.
That's right, but in many ways that also disregards what people actually feel, because my view is that this is not an isolated case. This is symptomatic of the general distrust that people have about government and its institutions. So when we go to LTO, for example, apply for license, most likely, and I have experienced it myself, we have to bribe, right? Because the system is designed to fail you as an applicant. The same thing for many other processes in the bureaucracy. Of course, strides have been made over the years to simplify the processes, and there's that citizens charter, for example, to make things efficient. But the fact remains that the institutions in general are still vulnerable to bribery, for example, or vulnerable to corruption and cheating. So the distrust that people have about the elections is symptomatic of this general distrust that we have of other institutions.
Did you feel that this particular election, 2016, that there was a lot of fear being shared by many about possible cheating?
Say that again.
Did you feel, as we approached the elections, that people had cheating at the top of their minds?
Yes. In fact, surveys, right? Every time Pulse Asia or SWS would release their results of their surveys, they would almost immediately receive accusations that their results are rigged, even though the trends are actually very similar. SWS releases survey results
Yeah.
that are very similar to what Boss Asia would also say.
Uh-huh.
So in that sense, there's that readiness amongst different kinds of followers. Ultimately, in the Philippines, after all, right, it's either you win the game or you were cheated, precisely because the institutions are not highly trusted in the first
Yeah.
place.
In the past, they've always said, if you lose, you were cheated.
Yes, and
If you won, you cheated.
yeah, I mean, funny, right? When Bongbong Marcos was ahead of the game, at least before the sunset,
In the first few
in the
hours,
first few
yes.
hours, right?
Yes.
No accusations were being made about the counting at being carried out at PPCRV as rigged, but
Yes.
later on there were these accusations, and then I even saw some of my friends on Facebook and on social media, people making some scientific calculations about how
How they were cheated.
that's right, how they were treated. So making these calculations about the amount of or the number or the magnitude and percentages that
Personally, I
that they were
didn't
losing.
feel that there was a lot of talk about cheating once the count had begun, and perhaps because of the sheer speed. Maria, correct me if I'm wrong. The sheer speed of the count
It's the
discounted everything about cheating somehow.
For me, it seemed like it. I mean, and again, we were also surprised. And the Comelec had so many problems leading up to this, right? And
Yes.
in the final days, they did say that this was going to be the fastest transmission, and it was.
Yes, yes.
But perhaps what reinforces it is that the surveys, at least in the last two rounds, were already showing that Robredo and Marcos were already on each other's necks. So I guess that matters.
And Duterte was so far
Oh, that's right.
ahead
Yeah. So
that
imagine
there was no room
that's
for
right.
speculation.
So imagine if Mar Rojas, for example, were inching his way closer to Duterte, that would really cause a
Trigger.
lot of
Okay.
fear on people. But
Okay.
that didn't happen.
What about Miriam Santiago, who was the running mate of Bongbong Marcos? She has chimed in.
Yes, she did.
I
She
saw
has,
the Facebook entry saying that she feels that the government is engaging in manufacturing numbers.
It's the same rhetoric, Cheche. It's not really surprising. I have much respect for the woman, but we also know that she has a record. In 2001, was it not, for example, right? She pandered to people's frustrations about EDSA 2, for example, and she was clearly in support of Arab Estrada at that time.
Or that she was cheated during the election with
that's right.
Ramos.
That's right, in 1992.
Yes.
So in many ways, I feel that, of course, it is not surprising, but at the same time, because all of these statements are simply speculative at this point in time. No evidence, no clear evidence has been offered as of yet. And I think that is what makes these statements irresponsible, if I may say that. Of course, I want to be objective, but at the same time, I have to make some, call one way or another. And in this case, if the allegations are without evidence, then simply they're pandering to people's fears. They're adding fuel to the fire, if I may say that.
Okay. From a sociologist's point of view, do you see any changes in the people's reactions to, for example, elections? Have you seen any changes in how they are looking now at elections because of the conduct of this particular election?
Sure. Well, for starters, participation has increased. I was looking at the statistics that you compiled.
Is it 81 or 85?
Yes, 81%. And then in 2013, it was about 75, 73, thereabouts.
Yes,
and then it was
you're right.
lower
Yes,
before
yes,
that.
yes.
It peaked in 1998 when Joseph Estrada ran. So I suspect that it has to do with the characters involved, right? And how contentious the playing field is.
Well, this was a particularly contentious field of presidential
That's
and vice
right.
presidential
And in many
candidates.
ways, it's commendable because in moments like this that the character and the quality of our democracy shine through, right? Of course, you've got the saboteurs. Of course, you've got the trolls. But it's part of democracy. We disagree with them, of course. Rappler and even I get a lot of bashing for what we say or what we don't say, for that matter, right? But it's part of our democracy.
Is
And
our
I would-
democracy doing well?
um, it depends, right? It
You
depends.
hesitate.
Yes, of course. Because I mean, sociologists are always very critical about this. If we come up with a checklist, most likely we tick all the boxes. We've got a judiciary, working judiciary. We've got working legislative assembly, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, and this is Nicole Curato's big project, democracy has to also be assessed in terms of the quality of discourses that people engage in, right?
Okay. And on that score,
And on that score, I don't have any objective score, but I might say, I would like to say that we are improving, right? On social media, for example. So we have people who are able to articulate. We've got millennials. I mean, I won't hesitate to say that I am still a millennial because 1982 is a cutoff year.
Okay,
And
all right.
people like me can contribute something to the public sphere. Not necessarily very popular, but at least people like me, Rappler does a great job in bringing these voices together. Sometimes cacophony, but sometimes also important, even though it's very noisy. Sometimes, social media can really be very noisy, cacophonous.
is it a
for example.
thinking citizenry?
What we have, it depends on how we approach it. Why? Based on our study, for example, Vote of the Poor 2016, we partnered with SWS to identify the qualities that people are looking for. I've said this a couple of times here already, but it's worth reiterating
Yeah,
them.
definitely.
The top 3 qualities that people are looking for across classes and across the regions are concern for the poor, principio, and moral integrity. People like us would actually look for something else. What might we look for? Platform, experience in government, and the more rational attributes, so to speak. But they don't figure in those rankings. They're in fact midway or even perhaps in the bottom.
But moral integrity is a very interesting trait
It is,
because
yeah.
historically, in the past presidents that we have elected, moral integrity was not up there.
The kinds of presidents you mean, referring to the presidents that we
Yes,
elected.
yes.
Good point. Because we have to factor in the wider context, what kind of candidates were involved. So clearly, we don't want to call into question Mar Roxas's integrity and sincerity, for example. He
Like,
gave
for
us a lot
example,
of things.
the charges of corruption, of the SAL-N not being filed, these things were not brought to the fore in past, even your moral character in terms of your relationships was either discounted or not brought up.
I guess there were. It depends on how they were brought up and whether those who brought them up were reliable also, right? Think about it.
But you're saying that this is one of the 3
Yes.
characteristics
Yes.
being looked for.
Yeah, I can focus on this particular election season.
Okay.
Binay, not too long ago, right, was up there.
Yes.
This was before Poe, this was before Rojas made that decision. And he was the big enemy. He had concern for the poor,
Yes.
and perhaps his integrity was not yet in question until the corruption allegations
Yes.
were brought to the table.
Okay.
That was a very powerful move on the part of his enemies because how can you be actually concerned about the poor? In other words, the bigger question is how can you be in reality be concerned about the poor if you have all this lavishness?
Yes.
Impossible to achieve given a mayor's salary and a vice president's salary, amongst other things. So I think people are willing to balance them out, you see. They have their own assessments.
Yes.
In Tacloban, for example, where I just came, where I've just been for my research. So we asked them, so whom would you vote for, or what kind of candidates are you looking for? And they would always say, we want this candidate to win, but although he or she is not popular, because she or he won't make us leave this place. Many of them have rebuilt their shelters in no-build zones. We have to bear that in mind. People think that if you're not from Tacloban, most likely you would think that Tacloban has come back to life again. If you look at the downtown area, if you look at the malls, yes. But when you look at the outskirts, those barangays, those coastal villages, for example, that suffer the brunt of Yolanda, many of them, yes, some of them have already been relocated, but some of them have decided to stay. And why are they staying? It's not because they're willing to fight it out until the next Yolanda happens. It's simply because they don't have livelihoods elsewhere. And any candidate who can assure them that they can stay and they won't be relocated,
Gets their vote.
Gets their vote precisely because they've seen how it has already panned out among the other their former neighbors who were relocated to other places. They lost their livelihoods, and in just a couple of months they decided to come back to those no-build zones. In other words, people are looking for candidates. I'm not saying it's irrational, even though they're looking for the soft qualities, if I may put them that way, right? If I may put it that way, they are thinking of supporting candidates who would more or less uphold their interests. And that's quite a valid sentiment. Are they thinking? Yes, of course they are thinking. The
Well, then
question
that's
is,
good news that now we have a thinking voter
yeah.
as
Oh, yeah.
opposed to an emotionally swept voter. Did you see that?
That's right. Although I must say that all elections are emotional at the end of the day.
I was going to disagree.
Yeah.
I was definitely going to.
I mean, yes,
Okay,
you've been
why do
everywhere.
you say that, Maria?
No, I mean, if you go back to just the studies, the academic studies that show that up to 80% of how we make, people in general, how we make decisions in our lives is not based on what we think, it's based on how we feel.
Yes.
Actually, the only reason I cite that is because that's the reason we have mood meters in Rappler, because
Alright.
what we think that in order to get people to think, we first need to get them, we
To
need to
feel,
capture them,
that's
and the way
right.
to capture them is actually through their emotions. Isn't
That's
advertising
right.
is all about that, right?
And if I may say this also, in sociology, we don't really make that distinction between emotionalism and rationality because there are different kinds of rationalities. There's what we call substantive rationality, meaning the values that people uphold. That's rational,
Yes.
albeit substantive.
Yes.
And then there's formal rationality,
Yes.
which is about means ends, the relationship
Yes.
between the means and the ends, and optimizing our resources. Two different mechanisms, but rational nevertheless.
You were talking about not being able to separate, not separating the emotional from the
Yeah,
rational.
that's right.
But are those two intertwined?
Those two, of course, are at the end of the day intertwined. I mean, if I may make it more easier to understand for our viewers, I mean, when we fall in love, right? It's at
Yes.
the same time. It's both,
A rational,
and emotional, right?
yeah.
But of course, I use rational in quotes, in
Yes.
the sense that
Sometimes they think when you're in love, you're irrational.
Oh, yes, but sociologists would always say that a woman falls in love with a man who is more economically stable, for example. It has to do with the gender expectations,
Okay.
and then when we look at the advertisements, for example, the man always has to be taller, and that seems to be the pattern. I mean, it plays into to the expectations that we have of gender. But
Yes.
put that aside.
Okay.
So there, in that sense, it might be irrational. But put that aside.
You know
yeah,
the
sorry.
Daniel Kahneman where he said thinking fast, thinking slow. Do you think about that as emotions and then, or not really? Thinking fast is your gut reaction. Thinking slow is more rational. Is that the way you would think about it?
But at the end of the day, we cannot really ask people to make a distinction between what they value and what values in terms of the virtues that matter to them, like concern for the poor, for example, and the rational manifestations of such concern for the poor. So when they think about their livelihoods, isn't that rational in an economic sense of the word? Of course, why would they want to move to a relocation site, or why would they want to move to a bunkhouse that is so far from the mercado, from the palengke, which sustains them? And if I may say this, right, we always think of our coastal villagers as fisher folk, but in Tacloban apparently they're
They're
no
not.
longer fisher folk.
They're not fisher
they're
folk.
already selling bananas from other
They
provinces.
just live by the coast.
Because that's the only space that is available to them.
Available.
So
I see.
building back better, in other words, has to factor that in. This we are not the first ones to say this, but at the end of the day, livelihoods do matter. So,
Yes.
so a candidate who gave them that promise, and in fact, in many ways, in Tacloban, the local elections were divided along those lines. Those who
Okay.
would make them leave and those who would make them stay.
All right, now that the
Yeah.
results are in and
Yeah.
we have more definitive picture of who the new leaders of our
Yeah,
nation
yeah, sure.
when our nation is. What does that say about the Filipino? The choices that he has made.
Can I
Thus
quickly
far?
show
Yes,
you
yes,
an
that's
update?
very
We just
nice.
had
Yes, yes,
another
yes.
update while we were talking, and so
Okay.
I'm just showing you the map view so that you can actually see where their reports are coming from. And this is as of 5:56:34. So
Just a few minutes ago.
minutes ago. And
Yes.
here now we still have Rudy Duterte with 38.5%. Mar Rojas, of course, now he's really run away with it, right? For vice president, the race we're all watching. Lenny Robredo still at 35.1% and Bongbong Marcos at 34.6%. We haven't seen this change since last night, but the numbers have changed. So Lenny's votes are 13,964,677 and Bongbong Marcos is 13,735,000.
My God, that's
Two.
really a slim margin, 200,000 votes.
I want to see if there's been any change in the overseas absentee ballot. So this is now as of 5:56. They've counted 22.75% of the precincts. That's 23%. And Bongbong Marcos is far and away ahead at 42.3%. That's only 60,564 votes. Alan Peter Cayetano is second, and Lenny Robredo is third with 27,615 votes, or 19.3%. Wow, runaway, Rudy Duterte, the overseas ballot is 73%.
This is amazing.
For Duterte.
For
For
Duterte,
Duterte.
runaway. The overseas Filipinos, so there are 1.8 million registered voters, and they are overwhelmingly choosing.
Is it
Rudy
segregated
Duterte.
according to different countries?
We can break it down.
Yes, that would be great.
I will find out. Let me
Yeah,
find out.
Because I mean, I lived in Singapore, so I want to know
Exactly.
what the Singaporean Filipinos or what Filipinos in Singapore
what
are
they
thinking.
think,
Yeah, what
yes.
they think. Yeah, because
Okay.
they always think about Lee
Okay,
Kuan Yew and.
so what do these results tell you about the Filipino?
Let's focus on the OFWs. That is really
Yes.
an interesting picture here. At first, I thought that Manuel Rojas would actually attract these
Voters.
These voters.
Yes.
Simply because Mar Rojas embodies the technocrat, and I suspect that many of our Filipinos are no longer. I mean, in the blue collar sector, many of them are already in white collar jobs.
Yes.
And many of them might appreciate, for example, Mar Rojas' technocracy, but that doesn't seem to be the case. I think it has to do with the peace and order situation in the countries where they are based, whether it's Singapore or Hong Kong or North America or Europe. I also lived in Europe, and one would always fall for the, buti pa dito sa Singapore ang linis-linis. I mean, we were both in
Yeah,
Singapore
exactly.
at one point in time,
Yeah,
yeah. Yes,
And
yes. It's
Actually,
Disneyland.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's envy.
Disneyland.
it is
Yes.
Disneyland. Oh, of course, yes.
We were talking about
OFWs.
a post-mortem on the elections now. As Maria and I were talking about how the new factors that figured into this election, one of them was social media.
Yes.
And you mentioned that, Jayeel, that social media has had a large impact on how the elections were conducted. What other new factors did you see that were operating in this in our environment to make the elections how they were, to make it the way it has been?
Sure. Several things, I think, came to focus in this particular election. One is the quality or the means by which vote buying is carried out because of the automation, and we tried to observe some of these. Some cases of vote buying in Tacloban.
You
where
were
we
able
for
to
example.
observe this?
Oh yes, definitely.
Okay, tell us about it.
Normally, we think that when vote buying is carried out or is done by a politician or a candidate, it's meant to convert the individual. right,
Yes.
to support him or her, depending on how much money or how much he or she gave. Our findings show that, our studies show that in the end, people are just willing to accept money from different kinds of candidates and still, for themselves, make their own decision based on their own conscience and the virtues that I spelled out a while ago.
No sense of obligation.
No, in some cases there is that sense of obligation, but but ultimately, if you receive money from 5 different candidates, to whom are you actually obliged?
To
right?
yourself.
To yourself, yes, of course, but that's
Yes.
a very middle class and upper class disposition, right? So all these voters' education, messages that some NGOs or some networks are involved in, like saying that, oh, wag mo dapat ibenta ang boto mo kasi binibenta mo rin ang iyong kaluluwa, don't really resonate with at least our informants. And by the way, we are located in different sites: Quezon City, Camarines Sur, Tacloban, and Zamboanga, urban poor, rural poor, conflict poor, disaster poor. So different spaces and settings of poverty. And we notice that people are saying exactly the same things. We want to receive this money because we didn't even ask for it in the first place, amongst
Yes.
other reasons.
But does that is that a presaging of what can happen to vote buying as a practice?
As a practice, I don't even know if the character has changed because it's only now really that we are able to investigate it in depth like this. I believe Marites Vitug had this interview with Professor Jun Aguilar. He's actually our principal investigator about this. And we also found out, I mean, amongst some of the findings we have there, people think that the money that they're getting from these candidates are rightfully theirs. We call it rightful money. We have an
Yes.
acronym, in fact, but letter R is rightful money. Some of them think, for example, that the money that they receive came from their taxes in the first place,
Okay.
or were in fact stolen from them.
Stolen money.
Stolen money also. So in that sense, you can view vote buying as one of those mechanisms by which the poor can get back at their own candidates. So the candidates might think that they're actually buying these voters, but in reality, the power relations is not so asymmetrical as it looks.
Do you think that at some point in time, the vote buyers will say it's useless? They're not going to vote for us anyway. Let's not spend money on.
Not necessarily. Why? Because people still expect money to come. So there's that element of it, of vote buying, that one, it is anticipated, it is expected. So we notice, for example, in Tacloban, and this is also in other places, that they know that at this time, there would be these leaders, they call them leaders in some places, tauhan, who would start distributing. Or there's also that particular network. It's very, very strategic, Cheche. Where we were, for example, we noticed that it was taking place not in a private house, but in the very barangay hall.
The distribution
But
center was in the barangay hall.
Exactly. And then we noticed that it has to do with the social capital of whoever was in charge. I cannot say the name of the barangay, of course, but the particular the local politics there has to do with siding with those in power.
So it's institutionalized vote buying.
Institutionalized in a very informal sense. That's a bit oxymoronic, but yes, institutionalized, but in a very informal way. Yes.
Okay. All right. What other changes did you see in this election?
The role of the OFWs, I want to highlight that. We were talking about them just now, right? Again, this season has seen unprecedented voter turnout amongst our OFWs. I can empathize with the sentiments of these OFWs. I was once based abroad, and we might think that they are not as concerned as we are here in the Philippines because they don't seem to understand the local exigencies. But this election disproves that. 200, was it 200,000 or 400,000? I always get confused.
I think
The
it's more
voter
like
turnout.
400,000.
Is it 400,000?
I think it's
Because-
almost 500,000.
Precisely. So because in
Uh-huh.
2013, it was just about 113,000 or
Yes,
thereabouts. So this is like what? Like
a multiplier effect of 4.
It's unbelievable.
Yes, yes.
And again, going back to my hypothesis, it has to do with the characters involved.
But do the overseas Filipinos get the same sense, the same flavor that we here get when we watch a campaign?
Good point. My view is that it is filtered by their own local understandings by their own transnational understandings of what government and local government should be like. If you live in Singapore, you have a very different understanding of government or governance. You know that it's about efficiency. Bureaucracy is about efficiency. If you're in the Philippines, bureaucracy is about inefficiency and all those all bribery and red tape and so on and so forth. So when they view the Philippines as a failed democracy, if you will, or as a democracy that needs to be salvaged by someone who could come close to Lee Kuan Yew's model or character as a leader. And Duterte's rise is actually favored by such an attitude towards these local elections. Yeah, so my point therefore is that yes, there might be some similarities. Classes A, B, C here who supported Rodrigo Duterte are very much in favor of peace and order. Our OFWs are also in favor of peace and order, but with two different contexts. They know what security is. We don't know what security is.
Okay, all right. Well, those are two very interesting points. The social media, the effect of social media, and the OFW
Obvious, yeah.
vote. Yes,
That's right. And then vote buying, the changes in the character of vote buying, I must say, or the things that we're finding out about vote
Okay,
buying.
these three factors have impacted on the elections in a positive way, or how would you assess that?
Again, very good question. It depends on how we approach positive, how we want to assess it like that. Because of the characters involved in these elections, I think that many people now were forced to articulate the justifications that they have for supporting a particular candidate. Sure, there were trolls. Sure, there were saboteurs, right? And they were all over the place. And most likely, they were the noisiest. Right?
Yeah.
Again, Rappler is a perennial victim of bashing. And I can...
We've learned you just have to stand up. You know?
I have yet to learn that.
You have to, I think that this is one of the nice things about social media.
Yes.
It'll force all of us to have courage.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the mob takes over. And
That's right.
actually, it's that whole idea of the dissenter. All it takes is one dissenter. It's gotten a bit better. I mean, we can talk to our social media team, but it actually has, I think. Anyway, I'm
That's
sorry
right.
I interrupted.
No, it's exactly. So now we man up because of that,
Yes.
right? So at one level, it's about character building. I mean, someone said that character building is nation building. But
Cool.
at another level, I think it also has to do with defining, again, the justifications that we have for supporting Marolas, for example, right? I don't think there are Dutertards in the same manner that I don't think that there are yellow tards. I've been accused of both. But because ultimately people make choices based on valid reasons. This is the reason I have some sympathies for Duterte. Of course, I did not vote him in the end, but I have sympathies for the man. I do not have sympathies for the kind of trolling that his supporters may have been engaged in, but I do have sympathies for the man. Why? Because I noticed that in Mindanao, Nicole Curato and I were in Mindanao 2 months ago for a series of lectures there, and we noticed the students, amazing. We asked them, so whom do you support? Oh, what, 95% of what, an auditorium of 300 students raised their hands for Duterte. Even the faculty, sociologists who were supposed to be objective, were no longer objective because they felt that at one level it was an emotional vote. Finally, someone from Mindanao is representing us in the highest levels.
That's a big point. That's how a son of the place where you come
See?
from is ascending
That's-
into the presidency.
And that is a very powerful message that they're
Yes,
conveying, right?
yes, yes.
And for that reason alone, Duterte gets my appreciation, right? And
Admiration,
admiration, even. That's true.
Yes.
I speak Bisaya. I grew up. My parents are Bisaya, so I could
Yes.
understand him and I could resonate with him when he cried at his parents' grave.
I think everybody can feel that
See?
because everybody has been through that kind of
of grieving, right?
Yes, of course.
True, but there's something with the Mindanaoan admiration for Duterte that I think Manileños do not necessarily understand. I think when Manileño supporters see Duterte, they see peace and order, someone who can restore, uh, uh, order in our streets. But at the same time, but I'm not sure to what extent they could actually resonate with the Mindanaoan sentiment. Bangsamoro, crime there, how the poor are in fact neglected there, the lumad, and so on and so forth. It pays to know that that the poverty incidence in ARMM alone is 59%. As poverty incidence has declined over the years, because of some good policies, to be fair to this administration and the previous for that matter, it has gone down to less than 30% now, if I'm not mistaken. The point is, in ARMM, it has in fact increased because of ongoing conflicts.
Yes.
59%, right? Unemployment is, of course, very, very high as well.
So we're
Okay,
trying
so what do you think of this new accusation that there was a computer command that has been put in? It takes an IT expert to explain what this is all about.
It does. I'm sure it gains traction. I mean, but the point is,
What is the, I mean, what is behind making an announcement like this when there is no substantive proof?
this is the problem that I really have about this. Obviously, they're turning the public sphere into the court, into a courtroom, and that is what is at stake here, Cheche. To call into question whatever results that we might have at the end of all these counting. I mean, I would be surprised if, in the end, Bongbong Marcos clinches it. Would they still make the same allegations, for example? Would they still push for the same allegations? It might backfire in the end. But
at the
any
same
rate, it's
time,
Leni
this
Robredo,
is
of
his
course.
right as a candidate
Yes.
to be able to raise all of these questions
Yes.
while they are still relevant. And because if he
Sure.
raises it much later, they
Sure.
can say, this is sour graping.
Yes,
Why
sure.
didn't you call it when
Sure.
you saw it? So
Sure.
this is probably a valid question that he is positing at this time.
Of course.
Don't you think so?
Of course. It's just that for those who are not in support of Bongbong Marcos, this brings back memories of 1986, for example, the snap elections, when was it those volunteers, computer volunteers
stood
at
up
the
and
ICC,
walked out,
right? They
yes.
walked out and they went to
Yes.
the Senecal Sisters in Loyola
Yes, yes.
Heights.
Yes.
Right? So, I've seen on my Facebook account how people are, throwing the question back at Bongbong Marcos. Is this not deja vu, Mr. Marcos, for you? Only that you are the victim this time.
Yes.
Interesting.
So at the end of the day, it's really a battle for credibility. It raises questions about the election itself, but ultimately it also raises questions about Bongbong Marcos himself. For Leni Robredo, she seems to be, and please don't get me wrong, I'm not being biased for Leni Robredo here, but she doesn't seem to get that kind of accusation in a very credible manner.
So we're moving up into a very, critical period in terms of not being able to resolve the count for the vice presidency, but at the same time, it's raising the level of stress for everyone because Comelec is put on notice.
Sure.
Mr. Marcos is making accusations, and Leni Robredo is saying, let's wait for the results.
And-
Yes.
And this is what makes it really exciting, isn't it? Normally, we wouldn't care about the vice president, but now the vice presidency seems to be a more important position now. Not that the presidency is not important.
I guess we are holding our breath and comments about it until the Marcos camp comes up with the substantiation of that accusation. Did you want to add something to that, Jayeel?
It is really a tricky situation that the Marcos camp is, creating for all of us. Of course, you're right, Cheche, that it is their democratic right to do this at this point in time. it's much better to do it this early, ask questions that are credible,
Yes.
and they seem to have some evidence. Of course, at this point in time.
On this particular
Yeah.
question, no evidence yet.
Oh yeah, sure. But at least there are these. It's like watching a TV drama series, right? That it builds up.
It's a
and then
continuing
It's a
series.
continuing series, and you don't
Yes.
really know how it would end. Well, we know how TV drama normally would end, right? But in this particular case, we don't know whether the end is already in sight. And it is in this case that I think it's going to be a very, very long ordeal, not just for them, but for all of us.
Okay.
I think ultimately, this is an issue about the credibility of this particular election. Insofar as the vice presidency is concerned, I don't think there are many issues to be raised about the senators or about the president, but in particular this one. I think much is at stake, Judge, in the end. Why? Because you have Bongbong Marcos. Of course, he denies that he wants the presidency. But that's his, and I was at CNN the other day, and he was interviewed, and he was very conservative with his statements, and rightly so, right? But it seems that, of course, it's a very, very important position for him to clinch at this point in time, because he
Yes.
lost so many times before he became senator
Yes.
in the previous elections.
Okay, I guess that's where we are at this point. The vice presidential race is still a cliffhanger as we speak, and the senatorial race is still being firmed up. There are going to be there was a declaration of a failure of elections in 52 precincts, amounting to about 17,000 votes. The COMELEC has said that they are going to run these elections on Saturday so that they can hopefully get all of the counts from the different precincts. They're hoping for a 100% transmission rate and to be able to get everything in. At the moment, they are at 95%. Is that correct,
Yes,
Maria?
95.56%. Let me just check. This is
95.56.
as of.
Do we have
let me
any
see
more
if there's
updated?
an update on
Yes.
this.
Yes.
95.62%, the same that we showed earlier as of 5:56:34 p.m.
Okay.
An hour ago.
Yes. Let me just see the overseas, whether there's anything
An
different
improvement over
there.
21%, right? Or was it
Yes.
24%?
So do you have the breakdown?
This is also as of 5:56. Nothing new has come into the server since then.
So the overseas vote is still hanging.
Yes.
Which party list won for the OFWs? Okay. There you
88
go.
acts OFW.
And then Migrante.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
What other data do we have?
So you can see here for the overseas ballots that are coming in, overseas absentee voting. And these are the vice president. This is the vice
For
presidential race.
OFWs.
For OFWs is here.
So it's Marcos who won the OFW.
Marcos, yes, yes.
Okay, so it's
So far.
So the pattern is really very clear.
Yes,
Strongman.
23% only of the votes counted in right now. So Marcos is ahead. Lenny Robredo's quite low, below cheese.
Yeah, and she didn't make an effort anyway to reach out to the OFWs in the first place.
Yes.
Okay, and I think on that note, while we have the latest, we'll break at this moment. We'll be back in a while with Natasha for the latest wrap of the headlines. We'd like to thank our sociologist here, Jayeel Cornelio,
Thank you,
who
Chacha. Thank you
is
very
Director of Development Studies at the Ateneo de Manila. Thank you for staying with Rappler and giving us your quick analysis of what's happening in the field of our social, what is it called?
Our
For a
society.
sociological
Yeah,
view
yeah.
of what's happening in our hearts and in our minds.